We're on a mission from God.
On this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast.
It's sort of the biggest niche that we don't talk about. It's not that easy to get your arms around because within faith, there's a lot of flavors and experiences. And so as people get into it, they also find that there's a little bit of a tribal language. There are different nuances within the spectrums of faith that make it too difficult to understand.
You're listening to the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast, where we call faith-based filmmakers to cinematic excellence, bold storytelling, and sound theology. If we believe we have the greatest stories to tell, we need to deliver on that conviction. I'm writer, director, and animator, and your host, Todd Schaefer. My guest today is Bob Elder, the Chief Impact Officer of Collide Media Group, which specializes in helping creatives bring their projects to market through marketing, branding, and partnerships. They've worked for film projects such as Hacksaw Ridge, Overcomer, I Still Believe, and Apollo 11. Bob has been working in Christian retail and marketing for decades and has seen the faith-based market develop into what it is today. He's weathered many dramatic changes, including the demise of brick-and-mortar Christian stores. And with all of his experience, he has developed a keen sense of today's marketplace. This is episode 34. Bob Elder, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Todd. Good to be here.
You have quite an extensive history in selling to the faith-based marketplace, faith-based products into the faith-based marketplace. You've worked at Family Christian, Word Entertainment. You were at Big Idea for a while with a lot of other people who were at Big Idea who are now dominating the faith-based market. And then you went off to Propeller, and then you started your own group called Collide Media Group, where you are today. Why don't you run us through a little bit of your history there?
Yeah, absolutely, Todd. I started in the business back in the 80s. When I graduated college, the way that content was dispersed was through Christian bookstores. So that's the business I jumped into when I was just out of college in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I went to Calvin College and went to work for Family Christian stores. I spent my first decade hanging out with retailers, as I was one. Part of that time, the first 5 years of it, I was a bookstore manager. I ran a Family Christian bookstore. And that was a lot of fun because I was working directly with the consumer every day, opening and closing the doors to hear their needs, prayers, and wishes, aspirations. And it was a really great connection to the consumer. However, working retail is tough because you work a lot of weekends. Even though we weren't open on Sunday, which was nice, we were open every Saturday, and holidays were longer hours. And I had an opportunity in the early 90s to move from store manager to the buying office, where I took a lowly buying position as the buyer of children's products as well as card and stationery, because the children's product category wasn't big enough to keep one buyer busy. So I also bought card and stationery products. However, between those two categories, every book vendor, music vendor, gift vendor, and more had something to sell to me. So I met everybody in the industry as the buyer of kids and cards, is what I called it. And I was also about a decade younger than most of the other buyers who had a lot of experience. However, I learned a lot from them and loved what I did. And one of the unique blessing surprises, just being in the right place at the right time, is it was while I was buying children's products for Family Christian stores that I was introduced to VeggieTales. The first VeggieTales video came to market. And I, of course, as the buyer of the largest chain, was one of the first ones to see it. Fell in love with the music and the comedy and the sensibilities and everything that later became just a phenomenal brand, and had the opportunity to work directly with Phil and Mike in those first few years as they were releasing their first few projects in the marketplace. So one of the
So you were really early on with them then.
I really was, yeah. One of the fun things I had the opportunity to do is release the first cassette of music that we called Veggie Tunes. I released it exclusively through Family Christian Stores, and that was a promotional idea that came around releasing the third video. At that time, their videos, and this is back in the VHS days, the videos carried two stories and a silly song between them. The music from the stories, and of course the silly songs themselves, was gaining popularity. And so I suggested to the distribution company that we sell the music or promote the music separately as a pre-sale added value item for the release of the third video cassette. And so we did Veggie Tunes, which later on became part of a music label that Big Idea did, and went on to sell a lot of music, millions and millions of copies of various things. We gave away 20,000 cassettes, if I have my numbers right, on that first run as just a promotional item. So there are some pieces like that, and I've got a handful of things in my office that were the very first plush items for Bob and Larry and things like that very early on. So we could probably fill this time talking about the nostalgia of Big Idea Productions and VeggieTales and all that it was.
Yeah. So what happened with VeggieTales then?
Well, that's a very long story and probably a whole podcast in and of itself, or a whole series of podcasts. There's a whole bunch of people I could have you interview. We lived at the fun part. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, Todd, and I'll come back to fill you in on the rest of my career. But I later joined Big Idea Productions. It was late '99, and one of the reasons I joined is we used to say that our mission was to change the world, and through media, which we really all believed in the power of that brand and what it was doing. And we like to say that we were going to change the world or die trying. And it was Ben Howard there near the end times of Big Idea Productions, which officially went bankrupt in 2003. Near those end times, in a gathering, Ben shared that this is what it feels like to die trying. So we literally did both. Obviously, children's media, even children's ministry, and how the Bible has been interpreted for a generation. It's been impacted by Rack, Shack, and Benny, and the amazing storytelling of Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki and the many other creatives that invested into it. However, in 2002, a few things came to bear at the same time, market conditions notwithstanding. The company insisted on releasing a feature-length movie, which took all of the assets and stopped the profitable direct-to-video pipeline that had been going. It took all the assets, put them into Jonah, VeggieTales movie, and that was a little more risky than the company could withstand. It was not the only factor, though. I always say that there are three. Two are very clear in Phil's book, Me, Myself, and Bob. The one I just mentioned of putting all of our efforts into a movie that did not overperform. I would say it performed. It did 25 million at the box office. Good, strong number. We felt like we turned out a core audience of 5 million households to come and see that. However, it needed to do about 50 million to save the company and fix all the other problems. Yeah, the second major factor leading to the demise of Big Idea Productions in 2003 was a lawsuit from Lyric Studios because Big Idea had moved their mainstream distribution to Warner Home Video at that point. And there were two good reasons for that to happen. And those reasons were that the agreement, the distribution agreement between Lyric Studios had a couple of clauses in it. It was an unsigned agreement to start with, but the two clauses were a change of ownership and a key man clause, and both had been invoked. The company had been purchased by a hit and the founder of the company had passed. And so both of those clauses had been invoked. There was good reason to consider another option on home video. And of course, the market conditions were that there was a lot of interest in the distribution of VeggieTales home entertainment at that time. And so Warner Brothers was also very willing to help out with the financial woes of Big Idea. And so the company decided to go ahead and move their distribution of home entertainment from Lyric to Warner. And there was an attempted injunction. The judge voted against it. They went ahead and moved the masters and started selling, and then later came a lawsuit, and Lyric said, "Hey, you can't do that. We still are your distributor, and you can't sell to other people." So one of the lower courts found in favor of Lyric, and that was, I think it was an $11 million lawsuit. So looking at owing $11 million and having an underperforming movie release, those two things together in 2003 led to the wheels coming off. And so throughout that year, fewer and fewer employees were hanging around, and the debts were piling up, and eventually bankruptcy court in October 2003 sold the assets of Big Idea Productions, and it literally died trying. The third reason, which I mentioned earlier, I always feel like there were three. The third reason was just a culture that led to some mismanagement, and no finger pointed at all. It was just a transition at the executive level of a Big Idea where trust would be given and then taken back, and it provided a bit of a chaotic feel to the company. And led to some decisions that weren't always in the best interest of the company surviving, and that eventually, with those first two factors, came to an end. So that was a roller coaster ride. My experience at Big Idea Productions started in late '99 and went through the end of '02. So for those next 3.5 years, it was the best of times and the worst of times, and we learned a lot about brand marketing. However, the thing we learned, probably the most valuable lesson I received as a part of Big Idea Productions, was through the theatrical release of Jonah, VeggieTales movie in October of 2002. And the experience of marketing that film in theaters led to not only a lot of relationships with the rest of the marketing team there that have extended on till, through today, but it also taught us a lot about consumer behavior around movie theaters. And of course, now there is a faith-based movie industry, and there wasn't a lot of a faith-based movie industry back in 2002. So learned a lot of lessons at that time that we've been able to apply, and that are a part of our services at Clyde Media Group today.
So how quickly did you find another gig after Big Idea went down?
Oh, it was a couple of months. Yeah, I had some offers and just didn't feel comfortable with the job offers that I had, and God was really working over my heart and helping me see who He created me to be, and therefore what I was called to do. I had, at that point, at the end of my time at Big Idea, there was one other company between Family Christian Stores and Big Idea Productions I worked for, and that was Word Entertainment. And that fills in a music part of my career as well. After I was the children's product buyer, I had a couple of years of pure joy in being the music buyer at Family Christian Stores in the mid-'90s, and I still have some gold and platinum records on my wall from those times. There's a lot of the Christian music industry was really exploding at that time. So there were artists like DC Talk reinventing themselves with album releases like Jesus Freak, and Jars of Clay expanding into the mainstream, and all kinds of fun things happened during those days. And that's what led me to Nashville, where I took a job with Word Entertainment having been a music buyer for a couple of years, I brought my retail experience across the table to the distribution side, where I took over marketing for work distribution and started working with labels and studios on their release schedules, as well as helping retailers um, understand how to prioritize and position music and video content. Had a great time there until Big Idea called in late '99 and said, "Hey, can you come help us?" And of course, for all the reasons that I shared earlier, I was anxious to do that. When I left Big Idea Productions at the end of '02, I felt like that was a chapter of my life. My professional chapters had been retail, distribution, and studio work in that order. And so I flipped the page, and the next chapter was blank. And God said, "Time to start co-authoring. Not going to offer you, make it obvious for the next place." And it really took me through a process of understanding, what do I really care about? Why do I do what I do? And really at the core of it, who am I? And at that point in February of 2003, as I was listening, really in the margins of your life, you have this opportunity to listen to God. I was faithfully doing that. He shared with me, and I wrote down my professional mission statement, which had come out of all of that experience with those companies. He has called me to find, develop, and bring to market Christ-centered products that change people's lives to impact our culture. And that mission, if you will, I've now served. It is near the end of March in 2020. I've been serving that mission for the last 17 years. Part of that mission you see in the mission statement of Clyde Media Group. Our mission statement is much more succinct. It is elevated media that inspires a deeper relationship with Christ. And it comes from the same perspective. In 2003, as I looked back at the first 15 years of my professional career, I realized I had walked through the supply chain of Christian entertainment. I had started next to the consumer, serving them at a retail store, moved into a buying office, which then took me to a distribution job where I was helping with the overall schedules and planning and marketing and brand development. And that brought me to the opportunity to work for a studio, much more involved in the branding and work for less products, but obviously a very successful product. And we had a lot of things that we did during those years, including, successful exploitation of DVD to the tunes of millions and millions of dollars, and really the growth of the brand through brand experiences of live events, as well as other product groupings, expanding into licensing, very aggressive licensing programs that the Christian product market had never seen before, bringing in major licensors to the tunes of Fisher Price toys and Hallmark cards, and just a lot of great product coming to the marketplace for this VeggieTales brand. And then also, as a part of our brand experience there, we spun off a couple of other series, the closest one being the Cartoon Adventures, a 2D version of VeggieTales, Cartoon Adventures of Larry Boy. And then 3-2-1 Penguins, another 3D property that we launched there in 2000, before the launch of the VeggieTales movie in 2002. So a lot of great experiences over the following decade. The new company, Big Idea Incorporated, and its various versions and ownership has continued to grow and see great success in the marketplace over the years. And I'm very excited to see the team at TBN jumping in with NBC Universal to bring new VeggieTales episodes out. It's so fun to see that happening today.
So you went to Propeller. What was your Did you want to talk a little bit about Propeller?
Well, I'd be happy to. Since leaving a paycheck, I started, the mission that God gave me in February of 2003 was not a paycheck. It really was, as I like to say, it was more co-authoring my life with God more than ever before. But since leaving a paycheck, I've found ways to live that mission out. And I'm really in the third iteration of that. The first one was a small consulting company that had a very uncool name that I opened the doors of in February 2003. And that was just a shingle to do what I do best in serving clients. And my value I would share with people was really three E's. My last name is Elder, and our daughter's name is Emily Elizabeth. So obviously, I've got some E's going in my life. However, I looked at what I brought to a relationship and recognized that that experience in the marketplace of walking through the supply chain was really valuable. So I said, well, that's expertise. And then I looked at the companies I'd worked for and realized that they were all market leaders. Family Christian was the largest market share of Christian retail stores at the time. And when there were Christian retail stores, they were number one. And Word Entertainment had the deepest catalog and had so many things in their overall business that showed them as market leader. And then certainly Big Idea in the area of children's products and branding in the faith space, undoubtedly the market leader. And that filled in my second E, because as working for market leaders, I understood that they all do what they do because they do it with excellence. So I filled that E in, and to fill out the third E, following expertise, excellence, I looked at the people around me who constantly responded to the work that I did, and would say you bring a particular energy into the room, and that energy was my 30. So that was my uncool name for E3 Strategic Solutions. How's that for a mouthful? It was in early 2006 that I was convinced Together is Better, and my friends, a couple of friends of mine from Big Idea Marketing, had started in 2004 a company called Propeller, and they made me an offer in early 2006. So under the Together is Better banner, I decided to merge E3 Strategic Solutions with Propeller, and the best name won out for good reason. I've always enjoyed the name of Propeller and how we were able to market that. A couple of our taglines over the years were where ideas take flight, and then earlier than that was where dreams take flight. That brand we had a great time with. I spent almost a decade, it was nearly 10 years leading with Propeller. And in February of 2016, we finally closed the doors. It had run its course, and it was time to start something new. So that in February of 2016, we opened up Collide Media Group, and the mission, as I stated earlier, elevating media that inspires a deeper relationship with Christ. And Collide can be defined as two objects in motion that come together to make an impact. In my marketplace experience has always been between content and consumer, and I see those objects as constantly in motion. There's always new content, and consumers are not stationary. We can't do the same thing twice. And so that definition of two objects in motion that come together to make an impact just really fits. And of course, the impact is what we're all looking to do. When content meets consumer, that's the point at which God can change a heart. And if you go back to the calling that God has given me, to find, develop, and bring to market Christ-centered products that change people's lives, to impact the culture, the word impact is there. And right before it is change. And how about those two things together and what that means? And so it really sits at the heart of who we are and what we do and why we work in media, because God doesn't need us or media. He paints the sky every night and he raises the sun every morning. However, he allows us to be a part of that. And when we hear a song that reminds us of his beauty and his truth, or when we see a movie that inspires us to live differently, those are the moments that we know that media is really making an impact. And it's God behind all of that, however he uses that, just like he uses our relationships in our community.
So what have you been doing with Collide? What kind of projects have you been working on?
We do a variety of things. We launched the agency with 3 areas of service: campaign management, ministry partnerships, and brand development. And the work that we've done generally fits under one of those 3 lenses, if you will. The most work that we've done, most active we've been in any of those lenses, has been with the ministry outreach. Sometimes we call it strategic partnerships. But really what it is it's working with organizations who share the same passion and mission as the content creators. And through that shared passion and mission, their objectives really are the same. And their objectives are the same as our objective, which is to maximize impact. So we look at a piece of media, could be a platform of a speaker or teacher. It could be a piece of music. It could also be a movie. And films are a very unique way of capturing our attention in a beautiful way, taking us through a story arc through that ultimate redemption, reminding us of the rhythms of the kingdom. And when a movie does that, and makes that connection with us, it opens us up for a better understanding of that impact and what God might be doing. So when we see a film, we go to the so what moment, which is when the credits roll at the end of a film. I see that as some sacred space. It's very similar, Todd, to what you may take your congregation through at the end of a message as you listen. What is God asking of you at this time? Now that you've heard his truth through his word and through that inspiration and articulation of his order, what are you going to do with that? What's different now? So what? What are you going to do? And when those credits roll around a particular experience, and just by way of example, I will use Overcomer, the Kendrick brothers' last film that released last summer. That's really on the topic of identity in Christ. When the credits roll and you have been on that journey with Erin and you see that she started the experience without a father and ended the movie with 3 fathers, and the tears are rolling down your face and you're saying, oh my goodness, this is awesome. So what? What am I going to do with that? How am I going to now apply that? And that depends on who you are. You might be a dad. You might be an athlete. You might be a mom. You might be a sister, brother, cousin. What does it look like in your life to go back to Ephesians and understand my identity in Christ and then apply that to my life? So our job at Collide Media Group is identifying those so what moments, and we call them missional hooks, finding out the missional hooks. This is all part of a marketing process that we do believe honors God, because we're maximizing the impact of his word and his truth through creative media. However, at times it feels a little forced. It's not intended to be. We're just trying to open up what God's already doing and get out of the way, if you will, of his presence through media. However, there are ministries, parachurch ministries, and a lot of organizations, a lot of people who really believe in the same thing and understand that, and they will applaud and support it, and want to be involved in it. And a little bit of that is, just brand development, if you will, bringing an audience around something. But a lot of it is ongoing ministry impact. And what does it look like to go out ahead of a movie and prepare the marketplace through all those trusted voices who share the mission of the film, so that when the film comes to market, the trusted voices are a part of that experience and can be there to continue and the further ministry of that film, and certainly be a part of maximizing that impact. The film business is event driven, and a lot of things rely on opening weekend. So if we can raise the bar, raise the waterline on opening weekend, it means that the messages of that film would be carried just deeper and wider throughout the entire culture.
So if we go back to your Collide naming, business naming, to me the Collide is, yes, there's the consumer and the product, but I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, so you got the filmmaker who's got the vision and the message, and you guys have the ability to take that vision and message and work with the filmmaker to find those moments, those missional hooks, and prepare the audience, and then deliver, and then perhaps follow up in some way. So that's, to me, that's the collision as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a part of that, Todd, what we love doing is really helping the filmmaker answer the questions of, why did you make this and who did you make it for? Creative is creative, and we all have a lot of ideas. And I see the marketplace through a lens of where how do those ideas get developed and brought to market. It's just a part of how I view things. When I work with extra creative people who have a ton of artistic ability and have been willing to let that develop through their talents, I find that usually you don't have somebody who's short on ideas, and those ideas, though, they're kind of like children. They all have a purpose, but some of them are destined for more. And part of my life as an idea developer is helping idea creators, makers, discern the difference between those ideas and which ones are destined to go further. So as we do that, really fast forwarding to the so what moment is really, really valuable. It does help understand and put into context the experience of the audience, and what is it that's going to resonate with them when those credits roll, and how will they connect. So we prepare the marketplace through all those partnerships. So what's happened in the last 4 years with Collide Media Group is around this experience of strategic partnerships or ministry outreach, we've developed tons and tons of relationships, as well as a certain expertise in hand-holding through those relationships, because we can all have good intentions as an outcome of a meeting that don't lead to results, measurable results. So often we'll be talking with the stakeholders around a project, through the studio distribution systems and the filmmakers themselves and all the producers who get involved. We'll talk with the stakeholders, and they'll, tell us about all their relationships. But getting that relationship from good intentions to measurable results takes a lot of heavy lifting in a marketing process. And that's what our team at Collide does. We come alongside those stakeholders into those relationships. We identify what our missional outcome intention is with each partnership. And then we hold their hands all the way through to make sure we're all communicating, singing off the same sheet in the rhythms of the release in the marketplace, so that the right chorus is what's singing to the audience that needs to hear it, and then they'll respond. So that takes a lot of efforts, and we love doing that. We have been able to work on a lot of projects. It was in the middle of last year, 2019. I was looking at some of the films that we were working on in that year, and what we had been doing, and I started to add up the films that Clyde Media Group had worked on in the just over 3 years that we had existed. At that point, we were about somewhere in that three and a half years that we'd been around. And some of this is just a number of projects in the marketplace, of course. However, a lot of it has to do with the area that we found that we serve really well in, and activating these ministry alliances. It was at that point that we had actually exceeded the number of projects I had been a part of at Propeller over 10 years, in just over 3 years. And so we've been able to work on a lot more films that have been released theatrically than I did in the previous decade at Propeller. And like I said, some of that is, there were some years at Propeller, there weren't very many films being released in theaters. There were some pretty dry years in the early 2000s. After those, big events of Passion of the Christ and Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then even in 2006, as Facing the Giants kind of shocked everybody. Those next few years, it was a little spotty in the number of releases coming out. But in the early teens, it started to really pick up. And of course, we've been a big part of that here in the last 4 years.
Yeah, so you see an uptick in the amount of Christian films coming in these days.
Yeah, and it goes year by year. This past year, 2019, we had less films released in theaters. However, their average box office was higher, so we had a nice uptick on the average this past year. And we have a big hold right now. Yes. It's yes. 2020 is going to be marked in a lot of industries, right? So we're all looking at that, and the good news is there's a good amount of content that's been created that will be available when the theaters open up in the faith space. And I'm also pretty confident, just because of the entrepreneurship of Christian filmmakers and the way that a lot of these films are put together, just because there are lower budgets generally with, less than A-level Hollywood talent. It provides a little more flexibility. I think the industry, the faith-based film industry, can respond really quick and will respond when it comes time to open in theaters back up.
So when you get clients, are they usually brought to you by the bigger brands like Sony Affirm and WTA Group and those guys? Or do you see a lot of people coming to you, filmmakers coming to you with films that are either completed or somewhere along the process of being in production?
Yeah, it's a mix of both, and it certainly comes from relationships and our experience in the industry. So we do get the calls from the studios and the bigger entities. However, we also have a lot of conversations. I keep a list of projects in development that are overt in their nature. And while every piece of content I can find God in, because he's the creator of all, it doesn't mean that I would define, every movie as a Christian movie, even though I can find the Christ in all things. So it's hard. We could probably go on an hour about defining that. But I generally look at faith film that I track as film that is made with and targeting a faith-based consumer, made with them in mind and targeting them. Now, it may be targeting them as an outreach opportunity to evangelize the world as well. However, it's going to have messaging in it that's strong. And, of course, we categorize them, tag them as various perspectives of sort of heavy faith content to lightly inspirational. And there's all kinds of ways that you can look at it. However, most of what we're looking at is there a significant effort made towards people of faith in the marketing of this? And that eliminates some of the lighter efforts. A lot of the studios will do, with the demographics in mind, they'll do some marketing and advertising towards people of faith. And just because there's marketing towards people of faith doesn't make it a faith-based movie. So my best example of that is Superman. Warner's great, and they do a great job of identifying the faith audience and reaching out to them. And there's certainly redemptive moments in a movie like that. And Jonathan and Ted at Grace Hill are great at pulling those out, really believe strongly in what they do. However, I wouldn't call Superman a faith-based movie or call that, part of our movies to track in faith-based marketing.
Yeah, we do have a unique market. That's your specialty. I think you know that market very well. Obviously, you've been in it for all of your career. Could you talk about that a little bit, about what is unique about the faith-based market in terms of reaching them, what kind of filters they're working through?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the surprises still in my, after working for decades in this marketplace, it still astounds me that people don't understand the consumer side and the consumer behavior side of faith. It seems to be left to this general, mix of mystery that normal marketing people, I didn't learn about this in my MBA program. And so I'm just I don't want to touch politics and faith. These are the two things we don't talk about at Thanksgiving, and two things that we don't try to understand in the marketplace. And it really is amazing to me that it's not better understood. There have been major efforts of, various conferences and workshops and, people with expertise in this area that are available as consultants to the studios. But I have sat in the boardrooms of studios are full of people who are just sitting there with quizzical looks on their face going, really? I didn't realize how many people actually went to church every weekend. It's some call it the flyover issue that between New York and California, those states that are all the flyover states are ignored for their values. And some of that feels political, and we could, sort of go into it that way. But there's a lot of it that's just lifestyle faith. And that faith is being lived out in New York and LA as well. It's just seen as another consumer choice versus the motivational, elements or cause of behavior. So it is, it's sort of the biggest niche that we don't talk about. It's, it's not that easy to get your arms around, because within faith, there's a lot of flavors and experiences. And so as people get into it, they also, find that there's a little bit of a tribal language. There are different nuances and experiences within the spectrums of faith that make it too difficult to understand. And so as a way of avoiding misstep, they decided to stay away completely from all faith. And those independent producers and ministers of the gospel through media that understand it and are not afraid to step into it and help reach, and I even use the word exploit, the messages into the marketplace have been seen as anomalies, overnight successes and, exceptions. And they're really not. The work that's being done for the gospel in movie making I think is just a fraction of what can be done and what hopefully will be done. I don't see it as a niche. I see the numbers on lots of other media industries and categories, whether it's music or publishing or um, technology. There's a ton of participation through the lens of faith through a lot of these categories. In the box office, in our best year, has been less than half of what I think it could be. So I'm a big believer that the audience is there and ready to respond. We just need to continue to raise the bar quality on both the production and marketing side in order to be smart in serving them well and helping them see that this media really can be a ministry tool to share their faith and experience with the world.
So, compared to other audience groups, what do you think are, let's say, give me one big challenge that the faith-based audience presents to somebody like you who's trying to market to them, and then one sort of give me something that's really exciting about that group that makes it easy to reach, if there is such a thing.
Yeah. So the big challenge would be people of faith that consume Christian media, say they listen to Christian radio or they listen to podcasts or read, blogs and media sources that are more faith oriented. They're also consuming everything, all media in the world as well. It's not as separated as we might think. And so this is true of their influential sources and news and advertising. It's also true of their content consumption. We did a big research project several years ago and found that the faith audience was consuming as much Game of Thrones as they were consuming Christian movies. And so it's not that they don't consume. I mean, Christians are watching Tiger King this week, just like everybody else is, because it's the hot show on Netflix and they're watching it. They just come with a particular perspective. And Christian media has to compete with all media as well and all the entertainment choices. So the big challenge is that if we jump back to animated, if you're going to put an animated picture in the marketplace, your competition is not other Christian animated projects. Your competition is Pixar with its storytelling and quality of animation and everything around it. And the investment into Pixar is a little bigger than probably your budget would be. So that poses a big challenge. The opportunity, I think, is I would describe it as shelf life, or I might use the word stick-to-itness, if that is a word. I might have just made that up, Todd. But there's just something about the faith audience that when they connect to something, they own it. My best example of that was back in 2005. I had the pleasure of working for on a project that Disney had released, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or was releasing. And I was working for the faith-based marketing effort of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And there was a campaign pulled together, and out of my Christian retail experience and know-how and my veg sales experience and everything, I got the job of activating the Christian retail marketplace for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I remember going to convention that particular summer. It's back when there were conventions for Christian retailers. But going to the convention that summer before the movie release, and through my meetings, every meeting, my trusted relationships who knew me and were very excited about this movie coming out, everybody had the same question. And their question was, did Disney mess up the Chronicles of Narnia? Like, that was their question. They're like, did Disney take the Jesus out of the Chronicles of Narnia? Because if so, I'm not that interested in this. And to be able to hold that allegory of Christ in Aslan, to be able to hold that in that story and for it to show up and for Christians to go, yes, C.S. Lewis, founder of our faith, like, and, beacon of hope, you are delivering to generations, this amazing story of God's sacrifice for us through his son. And that question was the obvious question that the faith culture had. Did Disney or anybody that took the writings that we believe, really came through a man's sacrifice and faith in God, did someone take that faith out of it? And that movie did really well, 300 million at the box office. It was fantastic. Such a great experience. And I think there was some sensitivity on Disney's part of marketing to the faith. They sort of got attacked in the middle of it for marketing to people of faith. But look at what you're marketing. Look at your source material. And I think there was a huge opportunity to grow from there, and it unfortunately went the other direction. But the patience and understanding and stickiness of the faith audience is such an advantage. I like to say the who and the why matter more than the what and the how. Who made it and why did they make it? That's what people of faith care about. They want to know that the people that are creating this are just like me. If I was to try to tell a Bible story through some talking vegetables, I would do it like Mike and Phil did. And that's that connection point that we want to trust not only the content, we want to trust who's behind the content. And that's where people of faith, when we can help them see that, be transparent, help them understand, they want to be a part of that, and they will come along and support. So that's the upside.
Let's cast our vision a little bit forward, and what's happening in the industry now with the dissolution of theatrical, and there's more online distribution, streaming, that sort of thing. Do you see this as a good thing? Is this are there any benefits to this that you're seeing that are presenting exciting opportunities in the future, or are we still in the muddle where we're not quite sure where things are going to fall out?
That's a great question. I think what we're in the middle of right now with the crisis is sort of accentuating everything that was there already. There were interviews and articles written years ago about a changing theatrical marketplace. Some that were calling, for doomsday on theater releases because the quality of home entertainment. Even if we go back to home entertainment systems that with high quality content coming in, even as long, as recent as 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of why would I go see a movie in a theater when I can have the same experience in my home? Mm-hmm. And we've seen the theatrical box office continue to, survive and sometimes even grow. Of course, the price per ticket has to do with that, and you can look at the number of people. But the theaters themselves have responded by creating a better theatrical environment. Bigger seats, more comfortable, more, dine-in theaters, a variety of things to keep people coming to the movie theaters. So while this is a seismic event, I don't think it will change consumer behavior completely as it relates to movie theaters. And a good example of that, I think, is if we just look at other live entertainment business, and I realize that movie is recorded entertainment business, but it still is a shared viewing experience, a shared user experience. Last night, there was a very widely, shared musical experience with artists from their living rooms bringing concerts through iHeartRadio, and that was widely publicized. So that was great, but as I watched the news this morning of that, I also recognize, as everybody does, that's a lot of these artists, while they're doing what they can from where they are, that's not what they're created to do. They're created to go perform in front of thousands, tens of thousands of people. And you could say, well, they are performing in front of tens of thousands or millions of people, and certainly their music is. However, the live music experience is unique. It's a part of the industry that I don't think goes away unless we literally have to stay, 10 feet from each other for the rest of eternity. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think when we get our arms around the virus and create a safe environment that people will gather, they'll feel the value of gathering. They'll remember fondly the times that they were locked up in their homes with their kids. And they will also very willingly have those communal shared experiences. Yeah. And that happens in a theater, and I don't see that going away completely. And what this does for us is it gives us an opportunity to really work out some of those kinks on a direct consumption scenario, and find creative ways to continue to share the gospel, from person to person. I'm watching what's going on in my own community with my church, with my small group, with my friends and family relationships, the ways that we are connecting with our, video feeds and FaceTime and everything is very different than it was pre-crisis. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it will stick and it'll stay with us. And then some of it won't. We'll realize that the best, way to consume a movie in first window is in a local theater in a community viewing experience. Mm-hmm. And we'll be happy to go back to the theaters and do that. Yeah. So the same way that I ordered takeout from a nicer restaurant this weekend to support it and to break up what had been, sort of our eating experiences from the last 2 weeks, where we're doing a lot of home cooking, et cetera, et cetera. So I ordered takeout and spent more on the meal than I did, on any meal in the last 2 weeks, and enjoyed that. But it wasn't the same as going to that restaurant. The food wasn't quite as hot. The experience, of picking it off my porch and, bringing it into my home was different than a waiter delivering it, mm-hmm. Exactly at the right time with the right ambiance and experience. It's just, I don't think we will stick with all of our crisis practices just because we've had to. And so I think the movie business is the same. There will be some return to theaters, not exactly sure what it's going to look like. Is it going to be less? Is it going to be more? If I had to predict, it's probably a little less. So people are like, there has been a big struggle between the studios and the exhibitors related to the window, the 90-day window to protect the movies in theaters. And there have been some pretty strong attempts to push day and dates and change that experience. Now the theaters are in a place where they can't push back, and the studios are sort of having to do what they have to do. So I'm sure that brings that conversation back up, and we'll look at those windows again. But I think one of the things that we've discovered is that we, regardless of what's going on, we will get content. We will still be consumers, and at the end of the day, we'll abide by the things that keep us safe, and right. So some of this has to do with what's the reestablishment of normal. Yeah. Because on 9/11, planes flew into buildings and security changed. It didn't mean that there were less people willing to get on a plane, as the market changed and rebounded. Yeah. So it just meant that we all learned to figure it out. We took our shoes off. Yeah. Before 9/11, you didn't. Well, now we took our shoes off. So there'll be something equivalent, It's closest we have right now is hand washing, but there'll be something. Maybe it is the surgical mask. Maybe we'll have theaters full of people with masks on. I don't know, but I do think that content will continue to be created and multiple distribution channels will exist. And some of the adjustments that we're experiencing right now, the good coming out of it is it's challenging the user to accept new delivery channels, and it's challenging the content creators to exercise new delivery channels.
That's a good point.
And yeah, and so we get to work out the bugs.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you see as the challenges for Christian filmmakers as we, get into the next few years?
I would say there are more opportunities than challenges, Todd. I think the opportunities are original content and content from God's Word. These sources of content, whether it's original as in telling the stories of God's work in our lives, our testimonies, if you will.
Yeah.
There's so much of that, and there's a lot of faith film content that you would look at and say that's what it is. And a breakthrough, great example is how God works in an amazing way through prayer and through the faithfulness of a mom. And what a great story to be brought to film. And I think Devon did a fantastic job of bringing that story out. And there's a lot of those things that are happening. It's not like that's the only story of faith in the last few years to be captured and put on the screen. Oh, goodness. When we start to think about what God's doing in our world, when we start to recognize, listen, and respond to that, there are so many stories. So we have this endless creativity because it comes from the Creator. And that is, I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's an opportunity. We need to harness that creative and, really prepare and steward those stories into people's hearts. That's a beautiful opportunity. Of course, the Bible itself is full of so much, and there have been, from the Passion of the Christ to films that we've had the pleasure of working on the last few years, like Paul, Apostle of Christ. There are so many projects to be made from God's Word, and I'm looking forward to those. I'm just looking forward to audiences hearing God's Word new through these interpretations. It's really beautiful. So I think we have lots of opportunities. Of course, if we just step back and look at the marketplace, it's under resourced. There's not a lot of investment money that's coming in, and most of the bigger dollar pictures are handled by studios. Studios are more open to faith than they've been in general because of the successes. Someone a couple of years ago, I heard someone, I apologize, I can't attribute it to the right person right now, but the question was, why aren't there more Sony affirms? And so the answer was, there's only one Rich Peluso. And that, Rich has somehow found favor within a studio system.
Yeah.
And I love Rich, amazing man. And there are, that's absolutely right. There is only one Rich Peluso. However, there are a lot of other very bright people who understand faith and they understand movies. And there's a place where those things can come together. And I think it's a little bit of an excuse on the studio part to not put attention to things that people really do care about and the way that people live in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, Rich needs to duplicate himself.
Yeah. Well, we can all learn a lot from him. He's a generous individual.
Yeah, for sure. He's a very smart guy. Do you think that Christian audiences are more willing to accept non-name actors than mainstream films? Because this is something that comes up quite a bit when I'm listening to people talk about this or reading things where there's this drive for Christian filmmakers to sort of legitimize their film with a name star actor.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite answer to that question, Todd, I mean, it's a great question. You forecast it a little bit with accept. And I think that's a little bit of the issue. Let's look at, what we're offering. Are you saying that you're putting somebody on screen with less talent than the name actor? Or is it the difference between a name and a no name? What's the performance? Is the performance as good as the name actor? Right. And so my favorite answer to that is Avatar. That was a film, one of the biggest films of all time, brought to screen without talent. Now, those actors have since done very, very well. Yeah. Even Star Wars is a good example of this, where you're taking young, raw talent, and you are putting it into your content. Right. I mean, these are some of the biggest movies of all time. Neither of those examples went out to grab the A-list actors. Right. They had a vision for the story and the content, and it wasn't about the name, it was about the talent. And you could say what they put on screen is talent. They found great talent. We've got the advantage of the Holy Spirit. What are we waiting for? Let's go find great talent. I mean,
absolutely.
So, I think it's sort of a budget poor excuse. It's kind of like, well, I don't have as many resources, so I'm going to accept something. No. Yeah. Don't accept.
Yeah. No, I
Let's
agree with
use
that.
what we have, and I think one of our best examples of that would be War Room. It's a beautiful opportunity for, for talent to really show up on screen.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. So, if you were to give Christian filmmakers one word of advice or encouragement, what would you say to them?
Ooh, hard to pick a word, Todd. I would. I'll give you a word that has multiple meanings. That word would be hope. If we don't put hope into our content, it's going to miss the love of God and the ability to connect with people. There needs to be hope. Every one of our films, if I look across the marketplace at all the films that call themselves faith films, they're released to a faith audience, and look at the performance of them, when we lack hope, we don't work. It just doesn't work. We have to have hope. We have to consider, where is the hope in this? It's one of the key things that I look for in a film, because it just connects to so many other aspects of our faith lives. And then the other, there's many other meanings for hope, but one other would be, you have all of God's resources at your disposal. There's no lack of what you can do. So my hope is that every Christian filmmaker that wants to, be the next Urban Brothers, next Kendrick Brothers, or whatever, don't limit yourself to those visions, but really listen to who God's already made you, and realize that He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Let the word of God flow over you to hear who God is in you and be faithful to that. And just like, your hope is only in God. If it's in an accolade as a movie maker, forget it. But be faithful just as He will be faithful to the things that He's given you. Yes. He'll do His part, you do yours, and there's a ton of opportunity in the marketplace. The marketplace is very wide open, and even Hollywood in general, we a lot of times will, sort of demonize it, but Hollywood loves green, and Christian movies can be very green. Many of them are. Yes. So there's a lot of reasons to have hope.
Well, that's a great word. I like that. Thank you for that, Bob. And thank you for being on this podcast. This was great to have you on here finally. We've worked with you for many years, and I'm glad to to share you with the world.
Yes. Thank you, Todd. Thank you for what you're doing. It's certainly been a pleasure.
To find Bob and Collide Media Group, you can go to collidemediagroup.com. There will also be a link in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. For more information about the Ministry of Motion Pictures, you can find us at ministryofmotionpictures.org.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.